to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC, Rach. How you doing, Rach?
Rich, I am so hyped for our pairing today. It's right up my fangirl alley. Rogue One, aka Star Wars presents West End Games D6 Star Wars the movie. I was going to come in with all my old West End source books, but you have a specific game in mind for our pairing, right?
While I appreciate and admire your deep love of West End Games D6 Star Wars, yeah, that game rolled way too many D6s for a PBTA thing. I'm sorry to say that we should probably go with Impulse Drive.
All right. I guess I'll be okay talking about Impulse Drive. I mean, it's not like we're currently playing it or anything, right?
It's not like that in any... It's totally like that, yeah. Yeah, it totally is.
I got so many thoughts and experiences about Rogue One, along with lots of related MC advice, but it's a little bit tricky to talk about this movie without spoiling it. So let's jump to the summary and get moving along.
All right. And again, this is a movie night episode. So what we do is we talk about the movie and the game that we've paired together. That's the idea behind movie night. See also Masks: A New Generation and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, as well as Apocalypse World 2nd Edition and Mad Max Fury Road. We talk about the movie without spoilers. We talk about the game as a synopsis. Then we give you your spoiler break so you can go and watch Star Wars Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. I don't know if they could put Star Wars in there one more time and then come back. So here's our summary from StarWars.com. In a time of conflict, a group of unlikely heroes band together on a mission to steal the plans to the Death Star, the Empire's ultimate weapon of destruction. This key event in the Star Wars timeline brings together ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things, and in doing so become part of something greater than themselves.
That pretty much sums it up. I thought about rewriting that summary, but I think that's as clean as you can get with this movie.
They pay some smart people to do things on StarWars.com.
Rogue One, A Star Wars Story came out in late 2016. It's the first Star Wars movie to break away from the trilogies and be part of what was called the Star Wars Anthology films. Since then, Solo has been the only other addition to this sub-series of movies. That makes Rogue One an even more curious film in the collection of Star Wars movies, given that Solo is about exploring the backstory of a major character from the main films. Rogue One is basically the new canon version of what I believe was called Operation Skyhook for all of you old expanded universe nerds. Did you ever play Dark Forces on like a DOS computer or no?
I have not, no.
Oh man, this is also like a remake of Star Wars Dark Forces, which was a Doom clone from the mid-90s. It's like 25 years old, and I felt incredibly old when I looked that up.
Oh my. Oh my.
I guess this begs a question. How much Star Wars do you need to be familiar with to watch Rogue One? Rich, what's your take on it?
I think almost any level of Star Wars knowledge will work. You definitely need to have at least watched New Hope, the original Star Wars movie, so that you can see the connective tissue, but you don't need the prequels, which I find myself saying a lot.
I'm dying laughing.
But definitely New Hope. What do you think?
Yeah, that was my read. Definitely watch A New Hope because so much of Rogue One riffs off parts of that movie. If you have a day to kill, which you might possibly have if you're socially isolating, it might also be interesting to watch the original trilogy with an eye on how the Galactic Civil War would look like to your normal soldier. That's really the space Rogue One is operating in.
Yeah, this is the trenches of Star Wars. It's the most war-y of Star Wars that I've seen. It's crazy. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, no, I think when the movie came out, they were strongly promoting this as a war film rather than a space fantasy and trying to drive that home for reasons we'll get into in a minute. As of this recording, in late April, Rogue One has been released on home video. The quickest way to get it right now is streaming on Disney+. There's also lots of Star Wars content on there for further Impulse Drive inspirations.
Yeah, Mandalorian, Clone Wars. Oh, Clone Wars is all... It's done as of this episode being released. It's done. It's over with, man. Go back, watch every one of those 7 seasons. Okay, maybe skip first season. Rebels. You've got Resistance. Oh, man. You even got Lego Star Wars on there. Heroes of Death. Oh, shut up. It's good.
I was so disappointed, though. I went on last night, and there is no droids, and there is no Ewoks from my childhood. So it's not perfect, but pretty much everything else is on there.
You're not wrong. That said, if you're really desperate for your droids fix, check YouTube. There are a number of episodes.
Oh, I know. I went looking for them a while ago.
That theme song.
Oh, my God. That theme song is like... That theme song slaps if I were to speak like the children. Oh my God, it's so good.
You're not wrong.
Rich, tell us a little bit about Impulse Drive.
From Drive-Thru RPG. Impulse Drive is a powered by the apocalypse hack about making a living on the fringe of civilized space, inspired by fiction such as Farscape, Firefly, Mass Effect, Star Wars, and many others. Play bombastic, volatile archetypes in a flexible setting that is crafted by all the players as you play. Now, from Rich, I have run and played, actually I've only ever played in Impulse Drive when the designer Adrian Toon a couple years ago ran it for GauntletCon. He's in New Zealand, and I got up at 3 a.m. so that I could play in it. It was great.
That does sound like a stellar recommendation.
Every other experience I've been the Game Master, which in this game is called the Space Master. Here's some highlights of the system in my experience. It has evocative playbooks, which are called archetypes in the game, with interesting paths that cover a wide amount of ground in space opera fiction. There's also, interestingly enough, there's no advancement called take a move from another playbook that you often see. So those advances being absent, you really embody that archetype through all of the advancements. You really fill it out, and it's interesting because oftentimes I'll see other playbooks that'll mix and match, but here you have a couple of pathways, and you're going to be playing the Warhorse, the Tempest. You're going to be playing the Mystic. That's what you're going to play. The advancement is very quick. The XP, you get XP on a miss, as well as XP at the end of every session from some questions asked of the group. So the advancements come hard and heavy. You start with one move within your archetype, but trust, by 3-4 sessions, you're going to be 3-4 advancements deep.
Yeah, it feels like Dungeon World's leveling system turned up to 11.
Absolutely. There's a fascinating economy for paydays to gear. So this game is all about being a crew on a ship. And so you have actually I'm getting paid from doing X mission or job or delivery, and you roll for it. Gear is a much more important facet of the mechanics than any other PBTA game that I've played in depth. Sometimes you really want a character advancement in order just to open up a gear slot because you want to go onto that black market goods list and get something sweet. I thought that I had left shopping scenes behind in my role-playing game days, Rach, but Impulse Drive's brought it back. It's like bringing sexy back, really, I guess. Who knew? There is slightly more granular combat than a regular PBTA game, with moves and weapons that have a tag called Discharge, which can give you an advantage or is required to actually activate that move or weapon. And you have to use a separate action to clear. So as you can see, you can nearly double the number of goes, for lack of a better term, that take place in an action or combat scene. One of my favorite parts of Impulse Drive is the cycle of stress to harm to calamities. So you take harm, but you can push that to stress instead. And once your stress track fills up, you have to mark one of 6 calamities. Now, calamities, I first saw that in Night Witches. Mm-hmm. And here, the calamities are really one of the bright spots of the game because there are good and bad options with those calamities when you have to mark one. You can only mark one at a time, right? You have to go down the list until you get to the last one. And that calamity is literally an off-ramp for your character and their story. And it allows you to really have an epic ending to the tale, which a lot of RPGs, you think, oh, well, this is our game. We're going to be playing it for the next X years. This is definitely a mini-series style of game if calamities are fully in play. And then the last and most interesting part, and I'm pointing out because we're not actually going to be talking about it much after this moment, is that the group has a ship playbook, which the ship can take improvements and also drives your story and has its own set of mechanics. Things can go wrong if you don't manage the ship properly. And there are 5 different ship styles that really shape play because of the way that each ship operates in the stories that it can drive. Your default is the smuggler ship, which is absolutely the Firefly or Han Solo adventures. But I'm finding in our game some really interesting opportunities with the Vanguard ship, which is built to model fiction more like Mass Effect. You can even take a harder angle with the characters that are being played in the game if they want to choose the ships of the Predator, which is a ship of mercenaries like Dark Matter from Sci-Fi, or the Marauder, which is absolutely space pirates. I really want to run a Dark Marauder game at some point, Rach. I don't know if that's a Star Warsy thing. I just want to kind of see it, just to see how it goes.
I think space pirates are deeply underserved by science fiction media right now, so we should get into it.
All right.
But might not be great for a movie night episode, though.
You're not wrong. Is there anything about Impulse Drive that I missed, Rach?
Yeah, Impulse Drive doesn't quite do Star Wars one-to-one out of the box. I know shifting parts of the system are something you've talked about in length on episodes of this podcast and other podcasts. If listeners want to check out more of your thoughts on converting Impulse Drive and making it really shine in a Star Wars game, where else can they check that out?
Well, I've mentioned it on the Gauntlet podcast a number of times. I'll go back and try to find those episode numbers to link in the show notes. And just recently somebody asked me about it on Twitter when I went and screamed about how great our game is going. And so I gave a little bit of feedback there. I'll link that in as well.
This is the point in the movie night episode where we'll be shifting from a spoiler-free discussion to freely spoiling our movie for today. We'll give you a second to pause if you want. Come back and join us when you're ready. So usually we try to discuss the movie fully before the spoiler break, but hey Rich, did you know that this movie is a total party kill? Did you know going in?
No, I did not. I swear. I was still pulling for him to squeak out of it when Chirrut died. I mean, Kitioso going down was a big sign, but it was also the droid, right? So I thought, okay. And then Chirrut bit it, and then Baze bit it, and I'm like, oh dang. Oh, this is not... I mean, Jin's going to pull out. Totally, Jin's going to make it. Oh.
Cassian did have a fake out at one point where he kind of died, but then he was okay, and then they died anyway. And then more people died because Darth Vader showed up and was a absolute unit, if you're willing to use that term for it, because holy shit.
Yes. What was the thing we were talking before?
Yeah, I was rewatching this movie, and I forgot that he gives dad jokes halfway through the movie, and I was like, oh shit, Rich, I forgot this is dad joke Vader, and yet also horrific monster that no one in the Alliance is going to want to be around or live to tell the tale of. Like, you totally buy that, yes, this person is human, but this is someone who would live as an urban legend that people told ghost stories about.
Yeah. There was definitely the like terror of Batman coming at you when he's at the end of that corridor and the lightsaber. You hear the breathing.
Oh my god!
And then the lightsaber comes on. That was perfection.
When we were rewatching it, there was something that didn't quite stick the landing for me, and I don't remember what it was. And then that sequence came up, and I turned to my partner Rob. I'm like, "This is going to be the tell if this holds up," and it was just as terrifying as before.
Yeah. That's a rebel sword. Help us. The door's stuck. I'm going to die. And there's like basically Jason or Michael from every slasher movie, but he's got a laser sword. And oh, goodness gracious. That was...
I found out while researching this episode that there is a short story about that sequence and how everyone feels about it going down. I haven't bought it to read it. There's like a short story collection about side characters in A New Hope, and it's 40 short stories about 40 minor characters, and that's one of them, is like the end of Rogue One and people getting murdered.
Big time, yeah. And there's some super nerdy connections, now moving back to Rogue One, to set up things in New Hope, like Red 5, the X-Wing pilot, bites it, because that's what Luke's designation is in New Hope.
Yeah, I caught that.
Nice.
There are some deep cuts of this movie along the lines of Orson Krennic being a member of Imperial Intelligence, which is a big deal in the expanded Star Wars universe and is hinted at a little bit in A New Hope, but not really talked about. And I think this might be the first time where we have a major character in new canon who is associated with Imperial Intelligence. I have lots of thoughts on him. The Wills coming up made me squeal like a fangirl. Like, my first exposure to Star Wars was through the novelization of A New Hope, which goes into the Wills kind of in depth in the beginning because it's R2-D2 relating the story of A New Hope to this secret group with this weird name. And then they said the name, and I turned to my partner at the theater like, Rob, they said the name. They've never said the name before. Oh my God. But I think the movie does hold up perfectly well if you don't quite know what these people are talking about. These nouns. You could be that person at a Star Wars role-playing game table who doesn't catch the references but can totally buy it. These nouns mean something. They're important. They're terrifying. They're magical. But let's roll with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't go so deep into it that they lose you. When the Wills are mentioned, it's part of a theme. It's really what Chirrut Imwe is about. So talking about the Wills is only a way to say, hey, I adhere to what was lost when the Jedi were hunted down, kind of thing.
So on that note, why don't we talk a little bit about what playbooks we see in the movie and how they're embodied? Starting specifically with Jyn, because she is an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, I knew you'd start with the hard one. Oh, gosh. Okay. I was so stuck that I actually DM'd Adrian, the game's designer, just to see what he thought. And he threw this one out that I wanted to lead off with. Here's a hot take. This is Adrian. At Jyn's lowest emotional moment, unparalleled destruction was unleashed. When she saw the message from her father and her heart broke, the planet was destroyed by a destructive force that is her family's legacy. That could be aggressively read as a tempest. What did you think about that?
Why I think this is interesting in the context of Jyn being a bit of an enigma is there's a lot you can read into Jyn from the trappings around her. How does Saw influence who she is? How does the traumatic end of her family influence who she is? She's walking around with a Kyber crystal. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Will this ever come up? Spoilers, it doesn't really come up other than a conversation starter. If it did come up more, and if we saw that she did have latent force powers, I would lean into Tempest, but I think otherwise that's reading, I think, a little bit too deeply into what her dad Galen is doing. I went initially with Scoundrel because I like the background Scum, where you have ties to people in low places and people know you and they trust you. But then I had an interesting thought.
All right.
My hot take is Jyn an outsider, not in the physical sense to say that she's a different species or she's a droid, but someone who is culturally an outsider. She seems out of sync a lot with the Alliance. She doesn't quite always get what everyone else is getting on about. Her background is kind of working class Imperial, to be completely honest, based on the flashbacks. Then she goes immediately into the criminal underworld. She doesn't quite get this world that the Rebel Alliance is fighting to restore.
It's true. In fact, one of the scenes that we see between Saw and her is Saw talking about, do you want to live under an Imperial flag? And she says, it doesn't matter if you don't look up. That's pretty outsidery. That's interesting. Okay, I'm going to throw this one. This is my hot take. What if Jyn Erso is a war horse archetype? Hear me out. You could take the War Eternal move at start, which says you come from a culture that has been embroiled in a bitter internal conflict for generations. When you encounter someone from your culture, you'll immediately know which force they are from and how you can push at them to gain support or lose their cool. You have advantage when you intimidate or manipulate them. Then, as the movie is going on and you're earning XP like gangbusters, you take Battle Commander, Adrenaline Rush, and Covering Fire. These are all moves that avoid the Warhorse trick and trade of big mechs and giant guns, but really have to do with surviving battles and being able to tell people what to do. Then, here's the weird part. Near the second half of the game session, the player who's playing Jen says to the Space Master, "Hey, why don't you let me because we know this is a one-shot, why don't you let me take this last Calamity move," which reads, "Now or soon, your enemy in the war corners you with overwhelming odds. When you brace yourself for your last stand, roll plus stalwart." And there are a number of options, but I think she rolls like an 8, because that one says on a 7 to 9, you manage to defeat them, but your wounds are severe. You retire or succumb to your injuries shortly after the battle.
I think I did message you at one point while rewatching this movie, stating something along the lines of, there are so many misses and hard moves in this film.
So many. Like, I think that the player of Chirrut is the only person who rolls a 10 plus.
Ever. I'm going to do some mystical BS right now. Sure, Chirrut. Okay, that's cool. We're going to move right along. I could sense the darkness inside of him. The force moves weirdly around people who are about to kill.
Oh, I know. Well, let's hit up the rest of these. Cassian Andor.
Infiltrator, obviously.
Totally.
Great example of an infiltrator in Star Wars. There's not a lot of characters that really fit that archetype on screen. I mean, we mostly hear about the Boffins in passing, and everything's mentioned offhand. I mean, like, the core group of Star Wars characters, they are not infiltrators. I mean, the characters that lean a little bit more stealthy are definitely scoundrels. Your Poes, your Han Solos. They are going to run screaming into battle and not be really sneaky and thoughtful about what they're doing. K2SO.
That's who I think is the outsider, just because the way that he interacts with people, he has this oddly childlike, no filter whatsoever. Words that are thought of are said aloud kind of thing. So that'd be my throw out for K2SO. You mentioned him before. I think it's pretty easy, but what do you think about Chirrut?
Mystic, obviously, reskinned to be more Star Wars.
Yeah. Although, if you look at the Mystic archetype, it says that you've got this special weapon, and it's considered a trinket, which means the Space Master cannot really take it away from you. It's totally supposed to be a lightsaber, I think. Worked really well as his staff, which he also turned into a kind of crossbowy thing, but it was like a bowcaster. But like, was that all the same thing, or was he swapping out some kind of weapon with the staff? I was a little confused about that. Rach, what did you think?
I think it is something that's left open to interpretation and flexibility in terms of what he's actually capable of. I mean, who he is in his background is left a little bit of a mystery, and I think that's the most intriguing part of that character between him and Baze. Like, we know that they had shenanigans at some point. They're playing a 2-player, 1 Space Master game somewhere else, and then the Space Master decided to combine them into one game, and it didn't really end up well for those two characters. They feel sometimes like they're out of a different movie. Not in a bad way, but a little bit to the left, you know?
Yeah.
With Chirrut and Baze, before we get too on the topic of who Baze is, I think that Chirrut and Baze's relationship is a great place to look at in the context of an intimacy move. Impulse Drive doesn't have one of these, but other games do. It's not a sexual relationship, or it's not necessarily a relationship that can be read as only a sexual relationship. They do have a deep emotional relationship where there's a pretty big degree, actually, of vulnerability between the two of them, and it does leave a lot of questions to the viewer. And I do think that if you're struggling again with that concept of what is emotional intimacy, I would look at those two as just a good case study of where could you go with that.
Absolutely. I think that's dead on. I will say, for all the characters that we lose, and as much as I loved so many of them, the moment when Chirrut is dying in Baze's arms, oh that I tear up. I've watched this movie 3 times in the last week, Rach, prepping for this, and every time I'm misting up. This is so powerful. Such a great scene.
Oh no, it's so good. I remember being so upset with that when I saw it in theaters. Not like, oh my God, this is awful and I'm upset by it, but I didn't realize I had so many emotions tied up in these two characters and their peculiar little relationship.
Absolutely.
And then how Baze goes out, even if it is lobbed randomly by a grenade, it still fucking hurts. Pardon my language, but ugh.
Yeah, no doubt.
Speaking of Baze, Warhorse, right?
Definitely Warhorse. He is the most warhorsey of all horsies that are warred.
And Bodhi and Saw, how do you feel about those two characters and how they fit into... They don't quite seem like major reoccurring players.
No, they don't. That is such a tough one because Bodhi has this emotional journey, and I really love Bodhi's story. But when I look at him and try to say, what archetype is this in Impulse Drive, I couldn't really find it. Like, there's no just guy who's pilot and has turned to the right side because Galen showed him the light. I just couldn't find it. And Saw, I think Saw, if anything, Saw is a guest player who showed up, tried to intimidate Jin, blew it, and it was just like, bump it, I'm out of here.
Sorry, guys, I got a work commitment. Can't come back for any sessions.
Saw just gave up. It was a hard bit of just like, no, I'm not gonna run because my legs are. I'll just watch it. It's fine. We've got a ship. It's all right. But like seriously, leader of this thing that you're totally dedicated the rest of your life to. I must face it. I'm like a breathing mask, and just go. It's fine. Like, oh, Saw, man, you went out. But it was dramatic. But it was still hard to watch.
Oh no, like thinking a little bit more on Bodhi, he's got some parts of the scoundrel a little bit. There's a way to build a scoundrel that's a little bit more emotionally leaning, but I think he does feel more than anything else as an NPC who is meant to riff off some of the NPCs attached to other PCs, like an NPC PC triangle, as it were.
Yeah, could you imagine if Bodhi was the NPC that the Space Master was like, I want to show how Saw Gerrera is the catalyst to get things started. I'm going to have this sympathetic NPC from the Empire, and this player of Saw is like, I want to basically violate his mind with an alien monster that I'm making up right now. Like, what? Okay.
And the Space Master's like, are you sure? And then Saw's player leaves the game. And this reminds me of, this is going to be a deep cut, but like a decade ago, we were playing a Savage Worlds game where we picked up this goblin minion and just kept him around the party and had him follow and do things. We gave him a name and gave him some autonomy and stuff to do. That's Bodhi. Like, the PCs clinged on to this man and said, no, you're coming with us. Oh, potentially lethal mission. Oh, definitely you're coming with us. You're the best pilot we have. Who else could we depend on? You know that line, never send an NPC to do a PC's job? That Bodhi.
Yeah. I just want to circle back to say, I think Bodhi's an awesome character. He was excellently acted. I felt for him every time that he was caught and had to make that hard choice and pulled it off. I love that.
Oh, no, like I'm not hating on Bodhi. I left something in my notes and I'll bring it up now. This movie was a big deal at my workplace, and my manager was so upset about, one, the ending, but specifically Bodhi dying. We were not allowed to joke about this. So being the mean people we did. And one of my favorite moments at work is my manager just glaring at us and slowly sliding the counseling room door shut so he can't hear us anymore. And then we proceeded to laugh our butts off. It was so good. We're awful, terrible people.
I feel like we have found all of our archetypes that are filled by characters in the movie. Don't you, Rach?
I think this is everyone who is really definitely a player character. There's some NPCs I want to get into a bit, but I think that's going to need a deeper dive into Impulse Drive's mechanics and how it relates to the movie.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get to it. All right, now we will talk about what scenes in the movie could have easily been played with Impulse Drive to portray what happened in Rogue One. I'm going to lead off with a particular move. So it's on the planet where Galen Erso is. It's the research station. And The player of truth thinks Cassian is doing something a little hinky when Cassian takes off with a gun and wants to scope things out himself. And I think the player of truth is like, hey, Space Master, I want to scope this out. This seems weird. And then Truth, who in my game head canon, I believe he's the only player who's rolled 10 plus. He rolls 10 plus. And he starts off with a scope it out of like, does he look like a killer? Because that happens in the movie. That's in the fiction.
Yeah.
Then we jump out of the fiction of player characters talking, and he asks these questions, and the Space Master gets a little cagey. So, first question from Chirrut, what should I be on the lookout for? And the Space Master says, there is an assassin in your midst. Okay, who are here is not what they seem. Cassian Andor. Oh, well, what's my enemy's true position? Because you think, oh, well, Cassian would follow after them, but he doesn't. He doesn't do that. He just basically out and out says, hey, this is a weird thing. And then K2SO even says, well, his weapon was in the sniper position. And like, no one ran out to stop him except Jyn running off to get her actual father. But so I think then the what's my enemy's true position is the Space Master saying, oh, yeah, there's rebel forces who are on their way right now. FYI.
Oh, I've been thinking about this more in the context of playing at the table. Part of me wonders if this is a conversation that happens between the players, where Cassian's player doesn't make it explicit, hey, I'm taking off, I'm putting my weapon in the sniper position. That is something that the other player characters start speculating with, and Cassian's player is like, yeah, sure, that sounds like a great idea.
I can see that, yeah.
And then, like, deepening a horror of everyone left on the ship going, oh no, oh shit, what did we do?
Yep, that's a little bit of yes and. It was set up by the orders that he received on the way, so yeah, for sure. I've got another one that I think perfectly encapsulates the downtime scene. So downtime is a move. It reads, when your crew spends time relaxing after a contract or cooped up in your ship while traveling between stars. Each player describes how they spend their downtime, shows a short scene or vignette related to it. It's one of my favorite parts of Impulse Drive. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you can do there is confront a crew member with a grievance or disagreement. You each may write a hook, which is like a relationship statement related to that outcome. And I feel like the downtime scene of Cassian and Jyn after she's lost her father is perfect. She accuses him of planning to kill her father, which we know he was going to do. But he denies it, and she pushes again and accuses him again. He said he had orders. Then she says, you're as bad as a stormtrooper then. You had orders that you don't believe in. It is so intense. But then Cassian flips that around and accuses her of, oh, now you're joining the cause. Now it means something to you. I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old. And she tells him he can't talk his way around it, and he says, I don't have to. There were some serious hooks written right there. So much happened in that downtime scene. And I feel like from a story perspective, it answers a good bit of, well, why did Jyn flip so quick? Or at least speaks to it. At least hangs a lampshade on, well, Jyn's this like half the movie of not really caring, but her dad's dead and now it's on. She's all rebellion all the time.
There's definitely a shift in their relationship there. And I have some notes to build off of something Jyn does later, which I really think is her and Cassian's player playing around with hooks. You are correct. Jyn is pretty passive in the first chunk of that film until her father dies. That seems to be this moment of self-actualization of, at this point, this problem that my family has made won't necessarily go away. And there's a couple of moments before where I think she's slowly processing through flashbacks. There's a particularly good flashback that has always stood out to me of when she's very small and seeing her dad and Orson having these conversations and kind of trying to figure out where she is. Like, it does feel like hooks and backstory resolving and her coming to the realization, oh, my character's direction needs to change now. These stories are done. What do I do with my character at this point?
Yeah. Now, this is more story and less impulse drive, but one possible way to view this is that Jyn never bought into the rebellion, but once the Empire took her dad, it was all about vengeance. That even the things she says to the ambassadors at the rebel base, like it's all just to motivate them to accomplish the thing she wants, which is to take out Orson Krennic.
When I was preparing for this episode, I was reading some supplemental material, and I think that is meant to be the canonical read of Jyn's complicated relationship with the Alliance. In the novelization, there's a bit where Mon Mothma is talking about Jyn and her experiences with Jyn after Jyn has died, and the different ways that people in the rebellion are interpreting and putting meaning onto what happened in the events of Rogue One. Mostly bringing up that her read is Jyn has a certain sense of charisma, but isn't self-aware of it, in that Jyn could inspire people to go on a suicide mission in the hopes that someone will come away alive, and maybe not even realizing that the mission to get the Death Star plans is basically a suicide mission, but people will believe in what she says enough to follow her, and that one of the greatest tragedies is that Jyn didn't live to become a charismatic leader after.
Yeah.
And that would have been the moment of realization of, hey, I can show up and command these people to go and do the right thing when the odds are against them. What happens in the Star Wars timeline if she doesn't die?
Oh, man. That is so fascinating. And I love that Saw once said a person with a stick and nothing left to lose can win the day. That was an example of how charismatic and what a great leader she could be. I buy that. That's awesome.
Speaking of Jyn being charismatic, so rebellions are built on hope. That was a great scene in the trailer, but how does it play out in the movie, Rich? What's your read on that? Because I have some more thoughts.
I think this is a moment, assuming that Jyn is a scoundrel. I like your archetype. I threw out my hot take, but I really love it for her as a scoundrel. She gives this speech to the Alliance counselors and biffs it. She just hoses. It's a great speech, but there's stuff going on with the Alliance counselors that they're not talking about here, and the Space Master gives her stress, and she uses that to mark a calamity, choosing you're faced with a choice: stay under the radar or make a big score. And she walks out from that frustrating meeting, and that's where Cassian and all of his old crew show up to offer her a chance to just do it right then and there.
Here's another take on
right.
What happens in Cassian showing up. Remember that Cassian is the original source of the line, rebellions are built on hope. In the original context, it's not this badass dramatic speech that shows up in the movie trailer. It's him being burned out and cynical. It's like, we're going to come to this planet and hope to get the thing. Why? Because rebellions are built on hope. I have professionally used lines that are a little bit like throwing people under the bus like that. I'm sure you have. When Jyn is evoking that line again, it's a direct callback. I think Jyn is applying a hook she has with Cassian.
Oh, nice. So in impulse drive parlance, when you apply a hook, that means you're going to roll with disadvantage. So she was choosing to fail. That is so delicious.
Right? When I looked at the scoundrel, Jyn could have had a hook along the lines of Cassian is an easy mark. I'll wrap them around my smallest digit. We know their relationship has evolved quite a bit, particularly with the situation of Galen. And I buy that their relationship changed enough that they rewrote the hooks. But whatever that current hook evolved into after the incident is what Jyn is invoking, because they have a problematic relationship, for lack of any better term. It's sort of toxic, but I could see her deciding, okay, I need to pull people into this thing. And hey, we have this complicated social relationship, so I'm going to apply this hook, and you can't get out of what happens next.
That's beautiful. What a great expression of impulse drive mechanics there. That's awesome. So let me throw out Trut's walk through a barrage of blaster fire to turn on the master switch. If he's a mystic, he could have been using the move Suggestion with a 7 to 9, because He chose for the Death Troopers to follow a single command from you for a short time that doesn't risk their life or go against their instincts. The command is, don't shoot me. But it was a 7 to 9, which means they will soon realize you messed with their head, and one of the Death Troopers does that and shoots the whole contraption after he pulls the master switch, and boom, Chirrut goes down.
I mean, you gotta show that Death Troopers are a real threat to the other PCs. Although I think they're all dying at this point.
Yeah, this is when it starts getting ugly.
Yeah, a lot of characters have this dramatic off-screen death where there is no body. Bodhi, Chirrut, Baze. So I was thinking about that. There are situations where characters seem to be dying from poor dice rolls. From misses. K2, I think, is the best example of this. It's a raw sequence. This is totally somebody rolled a miss, and the Space Master went, the outcome is you're going to die. Like, there's no way to get out of this. Do you make the sacrifice so your friends can live?
Yeah. And that's a conversation at the table between Space Master and players. Because if you look at Impulse Drive, really look at it, you have a lot of hit points. You've got a lot of story hit points because no matter what damage you're going to take, you can always move that harm to stress. And then once that stress fills up to 5, you move it to a calamity and you're good. So this has to be a thing where you're obviating that cycle for dramatic impact and because it makes sense in the story. Or perhaps the Space Master is saying, you know what, I think we should do a custom calamity. Something along those lines where they say, no, this is the choice. Here's where we are in this story. We got 15 minutes until this onslaught is over.
Yes.
And then the player accepts it. I think it's fascinating. I think it's brave and bold. And I think you can totally do it at the table. Because once you have Impulse Drive in your hands, it's your game.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways I could see how you fiddle around with this. Another one of these in the lead up to this worst possible outcome is I think Cassian does have a fake out death, which feels like a 7 and 9 on keep your cool, and then reserves the right to show up and shoot Krennic in the back at the most dramatic moment. I love that scene. I love Orson and Jyn just screaming at each other on the top of the tower. That was everything I wanted from an upsetting Star Wars movie. But beyond the death of K2, I do think the players are deciding the fate of the characters. It reminds me most, not so much something from Impulse Drive, but there was a interesting hindrance in the Savage World Necessary Evil campaign rules. I'm going to truncate the hindrance because it's quite long and it's not PBTA. The important part is as follows. If the card you draw at the start of the session is a Joker, your character is about to die and they know it. At some point in the game session, preferably after accomplishing an important goal or an act of personal redemption, they die. The Game Master should always give a dying character a last few rounds of action to commit some noble sacrifice. Which I do think you see in the deaths of Chirrut, Bodhi, and Baze. They do have that space at the table to say, I am doing the badass thing, and I don't think they're rolling on it. Not necessarily.
I can see that.
Impulse Drive doesn't really have this card mechanic. It's something that's for Savage Worlds. Maybe the Space Master has a custom move. Maybe they decided to make a countdown clock where at the beginning of the session, there was a decision that all these characters are going to die at the end, and K2 dying is what triggers that end state. I'm not sure. Something to think about.
Oh man, I can see a countdown clock where you say if you don't roll X, you can mark a tick on the clock with your life. And they're all just ticking it down. That's fascinating.
Oh, no, definitely. Like, just the idea of, like, you have to complete this mission before. Maybe it's a situation where there's a countdown clock for the Imperials interfering with the Rebel fleet. And if the player characters die, they can stall the clock to give them enough time to transmit the Death Star plans and escape. Given that Vader shows up and chews for everything, that could be the dramatic payoff of, like, you did it at the sacrifice of all your lives, but this is your moment of realizing you changed the direction of history.
Yeah. Man, could you imagine walking away from that table? Oh.
Oh, definitely. Like, oh my God, that was so sad, but it feels so good. Let's talk about major NPCs. So this is not so much a rules thing, more than a impulse drive-in powered by the apocalypse discussion. I really like the antagonists in Rogue One a lot. I was reminded how much I find them interesting and exciting when I was rewatching. I'm like, oh yeah, this is my jam. I like fascists who you want to like hit over the back of the head. That feels good. I love Orson Krennic, despite the fact I struggle with pronouncing his name, because he is very much this fascinating example of an NPC that only exists because of choices the PCs have made. He is directly tied narratively to Jyn, but also on a higher level, like sort of like a character concept level to Cassian. Because with Cassian, we know that Orson is with Imperial intelligence, which would put him at odds with Cassian, who is rebellion intelligence. And we know that he has a complicated relationship with Jyn via Jyn's father. I spent some time thinking about his impulses and what they could be. I think he desires to impose law and order, but feels he's being surpassed. What causes him to eventually blow out and become desperate is realizing that Tarkin is going to backstab him. Like, Orson's not really an accomplished person. He's just surrounded by people who are really accomplished, and that's what gets him through life. And Tarkin's really great at manipulating that. And I don't quite know if you're handling scenes like that as cutaways to say, oh no, there's someone higher up who is more ruthless than you are. But that's making this NPC you're directly interacting with desperate. I mean, Orson goes and knocks on Darth Vader's front door at one point. I think that the last impulse is he does think he's chosen, destined, or blessed. He's this interesting, complicated figure, maybe not the most physically intimidating figure. He's not a Death Trooper, but he's scary in terms of how he's willing to react and how he's willing to escalate, and those ties that feed directly into the characters' histories and their abilities. He's a really great threat, and if you're playing a one-shot type of person that those characters would want to see go down.
Just to support your statement about he's destined, there's a quick dialogue between Orson and Galen. Krennic says, "We were on the verge of greatness. We were this close to providing peace and security for the galaxy." And Galen says, "You're confusing peace with terror." And Krennic says, "Well, you have to start somewhere."
It's so good. I love that scene. I think I mentioned that one earlier.
Yeah. But you nailed it. That's great.
Is there anything else that you can think of, that things or concepts or moves that our listeners can think of in the context of the movie?
The one thing that I wanted to point out is Impulse Drive at its heart has a ship playbook, and that isn't part of Rogue One.
It's true.
So that's one thing where the two don't line up as well. That being said, I really feel like you could absolutely tell the Rogue One story or something like it with Impulse Drive very easily.
I fully agree. It's one of those things where sometimes in science fiction role-playing games, there is a lot of focus spent on the ship, and then the ship doesn't end up becoming a big deal, or it's something that's sort of an oversight. And I mean, like, it's fine, especially in the context of Rogue One being really at its heart a one-shot game. If it was a role-playing game, you don't have to engage with every mechanic that the game presents.
Right. Well, Rach, I really appreciate this deep dive of some Star Wars fun and Rogue One as an excellent movie and our lens of Impulse Drive to deliver it.
I loved nerding out. I am so sad our listeners cannot see our geeky Star Wars t-shirts and everything that we're wearing today.
Why do we cosplay for an audio podcast?
Yeah, we cosplayed today, listeners. It's great. I promise. You're missing out, but just imagine it.
Indeed. Well, thanks again, Rach. And listeners, if you have feedback about Rogue One or Impulse Drive, anything you feel like we missed or biffed, feel free to let us know in the comments or hit us up on Twitter. Thank you.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, we want to let you know that Brindlewood Bay is now available on DriveThruRPG. Brindlewood Bay is a role-playing game about a group of elderly women, members of the local Murder Mavens Mystery Book Club, who frequently find themselves investigating and solving real-life murder mysteries. They become increasingly aware that there are supernatural forces that connect the cases they are working on, and in particular, a cult dedicated to the dark, monstrous aspect of the goddess Persephone will come to vex them. Brindlewood Bay is a cozy crime drama mashed up with Lovecraftian horror. It's Murder, She Wrote meets The Shadow over Innsmouth, and we think you're going to love it. Your download from DriveThru includes the rulebook for Brindlewood Bay, including a version for easy booklet printing, play aids such as the character sheet and dark conspiracy sheet, and 5 mysteries: Dad Overboard, All Hallows Scream, The Great Brindlewood Bay Bake Off, Jingle Bell Shock, and A Murder Most Mucky. We'll be releasing 10 more mysteries over the next few months. Some of these mysteries will be featured in the Codex magazine, and others will be part of a standalone mystery collection coming out in late summer 2020. The first of the new mysteries, Exit Stage Death, will be out this month in Codex Yellow 2, available through the Gauntlet Patreon. So be sure to check out Brindlewood Bay on DriveThruRPG. We'll include a link in the show notes. Thanks.